Identifying sunfishes is a great skill to have for any fisher here in North America. In this video, we will cover all you need to know for understanding the basic anatomy of sunfishes. Yes, we will cover a lot of content in this video, but you really only need to walk away having learned 9 simple things to be a proficient sunfish identifier. I am Koa, and this is KN Fishing Smarts, where we fishers are always learning and sharing knowledge about fishing and fishes. This video is essentially the first step in a 6-step sunfish identification guide I've created that will be both free to view here on KN Fishing Smarts in video form and on the Koa Nature website at koa.org/sunfishes. Now, there are currently 13 recognized species of fishes in the genus Lepomis. We call these fishes lepomids, or more commonly just common sunfishes or sunfishes. The genus Lepomis is a part of the family of fishes called Centrarchidae, which is also commonly called sunfishes, which I guess is a little confusing, but that family includes other species like the black basses and crappies, as well as other fishes. Although the anatomy I'll cover in this video is primarily focused on the genus Lepomis, the features are essentially the same on all centrarchids, or those members within the bigger family of sunfishes, and these features are also applicable to many other groups of fishes. But first we must learn how we talk about the basic positioning of features on fishes. Understanding the anatomical directionalities used when describing fishes is an absolutely valuable skill to have for any fisher or fish enthusiast, because it helps you better understand not just what my field guides are talking about, but what the other field guides are talking about, and what's in fishing articles, and even what's in your local fishing regulations. And knowing these anatomical directionalities is beyond essential for anyone with a desire to work within the zoological fields of academia or wildlife management. These anatomical directionalities are applicable to all fishes in the entire world, as well as to most other groups of animals. So really, this graphic I created might seem a little intimidating, but I just want you to remember the 4 basic anatomical directionalities: dorsal, ventral, posterior, and anterior. These are sort of like the cardinal directions: north, east, south, and west. The anatomical directionalities allow for understanding where a feature is being described on a fish, and are often used for comparing the position of a feature against another feature. Anterior-posterior axis. Anterior describes the direction towards the front of a fish. The anterior region of a sunfish is also called the cranial region, where the head, mouth, and snout exist. On certain fishes and other animals, this is also known as the rostral region. Anterior may also be used to describe a feature that isn't on the front of the fish. Let's say I'm describing the anal fin, which is not at all near the front of the fish. There are 3 sharp spines located in front of the soft rays. These 3 anal spines are located on the anterior portion of the anal fin, as in the spines are directionally situated closer to the head than the soft rays. Posterior describes the direction towards the rear of the fish. The posterior region of a sunfish is also called the caudal region, as that is where the caudal fin or tail fin is located. Again, posterior may also be used when describing features that aren't on the tail fin. On the anal fin previously discussed, we saw that the anal spines are anterior on this fish, while the soft rays are posterior to those anal spines, or directionally situated towards the rear of the fish. The last anal ray is considered the most posterior ray of the anal fin. Dorsoventral axis. Dorsal describes the direction towards the back, or spinal region. Let's not confuse back with rear here. It's back as in the spinal region. Both the soft-rayed and spinous dorsal fins are dorsally seated on all sunfishes. As I mentioned before, these directionalities are applicable to all fishes, so I want to point out something that often confuses people. Let's use a cygnathid for an example. This seahorse is often vertical, as in the tail is pointed towards the benthic or bottom, and the head is pointed upwards, higher than the rest of the body. Most fishes, like the sunfishes we are focusing on here, have their backs facing upwards or towards the sky, while a seahorse may have its head oriented more upwards. But that does not mean the seahorse's head is the most dorsal region. The general dorsal region will always be the region of the back or the spinal region, just as the posterior region will always be where the tail is, and the anterior region is where the head is located. Basically, no matter how you might spin these fishes, the orientation of these anatomical directionalities has nothing to do with the environment, only with the specimen. Ventral describes the direction towards the belly. The belly, breast, pelvic fins, anal fin, anus, and urogenital opening are all located on the ventral region of sunfishes. Ventral, like the other four common directionalities, may also be used to describe a feature more precisely. Looking at this eye of a spotted sunfish, if I were to describe the blue color on the bottom of the eye, I would likely say that there is a crescent bowl of iridescent light blue ventrally seated in the eye. Left-right axis, or lateral axis. Each sunfish has two mostly symmetrical lateral sides, a left side and a right side. We biologists prefer showing the left side of a fish in our field guides, where the tail will be on the right and the head will be on the left. Proximodistal axis. Distal describes what is away from the body or body part in reference. Proximal describes what is near the body or body part in reference. If you look at the soft rays in the fins of sunfishes, you'll notice that they start as one extension and then eventually branch out. The branching of rays occurs distally, or away from the body. It's always easiest to think of your own anatomy when remembering distal and proximal. Look at the back of your hand. So if you look at that back side of your hand and stick out your fingers, you'll see that your fingernails are on the distal end of your fingers, and your largest knuckles make up the proximal ends of your fingers. Alright, so again, I just want you to remember those four basic anatomical directionalities: dorsal, ventral, posterior, anterior, and if you remember more, if you retain more than that, props to you. Alright, so let's move to the basic anatomy of sunfishes. And there are really only 5 body parts I want you to remember for identification purposes. I will tell you what those are as we go over them, and then summarize those 5 body parts again at the end. The bodies of all lepomids are going to be deep and compressed, but to varying degrees. When I say deep, I mean that the body's vertical height makes up a large portion of the body's horizontal length. A fish described as flat would be the opposite of deep. So this ray is obviously a fish with a flat body. The descriptor compressed refers to the fish having a laterally compressed body. That is, it looks very slender from a dorsal view, or if you were looking down on it from above. Sunfishes have median fins and paired fins. The median fins, also known as the unpaired fins, are the dorsal fins, anal fin, and caudal fin. The first and second dorsal fins are fused, where the first dorsal fin is composed of spines and the second dorsal fin is composed of soft rays. And you may be wondering why I'm not considering this as one dorsal fin, considering it's one continuous segment. Well, indeed, certain ichthyologists or biologists that study fishes do prefer to describe the dorsal fin region on sunfishes as a single entity when the spines and soft rays are fused and continuous along the dorsum. I follow the wording of those ichthyologists who describe the fused spinous dorsal fin region and the soft ray region as 2 separate entities, while still recognizing these 2 entities function as a single unit, hence why I will describe, as you may well see in other guides, the dorsal fin with soft rays with the descriptors 2D or 2ND or just the word second. Another median fin is the anal fin. All sunfishes within Lepomis have a single anal fin that is posterior to the anus and urogenital opening. The most anterior part of the anal fin has 3 spines followed by soft rays. The last median fin on sunfishes is the caudal fin. This fin is indented, also known as being concave or emarginated, where it may also be described as shallowly forked. The caudal fin is composed entirely of soft rays. Now let's look at the paired fins, which are the pectoral fins and pelvic fins. There are two pectoral fins, hence why they are called paired fins. There's a pair of them, and the pectoral fins are the first of the 5 body parts I want you to memorize. There is one pectoral fin on each lateral side, just posterior to the head and moderately ventral on the body. The pectoral fin is entirely made of soft rays with no spines. The length and shape of the pectoral fins are a great feature to analyze for lepomid identifications, as well as the ray counts, where I did make another video showing how to find those counts, which is in the description below. The pelvic fins are the second pair of paired fins on sunfishes. The two pelvic fins are both seated adjacent to one another, ventrally and abdominally on the body. A single large spine is anterior on each fin, followed by soft rays. The breast is the ventral region of a fish, usually beginning at the isthmus, that triangular ventral fleshy region of the throat that externally separates the two gill chambers, continuing below the pectoral fins and ending at the anterior edge of the pelvic fins. The belly is a loosely defined common term for the exterior abdominal region. For lepomids, the belly may be suitably described as the ventral region of the body, beginning at the pelvic fins and extending to the anus, while also extending slightly dorsally on the lateral sides. The caudal peduncle is the posterior portion of the body that tapers off from the main body, both dorsally and ventrally. Typically, the caudal peduncle begins behind the posterior edge of the anal fin's insertion, or sometimes the dorsal fin's posterior insertion, where insertion describes where the last ray leaves the body. From the insertion, the caudal peduncle extends posteriorly, extending to the caudal flexure, or that posterior edge of the hyperal plates, of which is detectable by bending the caudal peduncle and seeing the indentation of the bones under the skin. The cheek is usually described as the region between the eye and the preopercle, or that most anterior bone of the operculum, also called the gill plate. The mouth is the most anterior part of the fish. On lepomids, the mouth is slightly superior or upturned on most specimens, which just means that the bottom jaw hangs out a bit further than the upper jaw. At times, the mouth will appear terminal, where a terminal mouth describes where the upper and lower jaws are in alignment. Sunfishes have moderately protrusible jaws, allowing the mouth to widen and extend forward to capture food. Mouth and jaw sizes are great features to examine when identifying sunfishes. The upper and lower jaws are made up of a number of bones. And here comes the second body part I want you to memorize. I want you to memorize the maxillary of the upper jaw, also known as the maxilla. And there are actually 2 maxillae there, one on each lateral side. For the purposes of my sunfish guide, the most posterior edge of the maxillary on a single lateral side is compared against the location of the eye, orbit, and/or pupil. This comparison is an extremely quick way of narrowing down your species possibilities. The snout is the region of the head in front of the eye. The eye rests in the orbit or the eye socket. The eye has a dark pupil at its center that is mostly circular with a slightly tapered anterior edge. The iris surrounds the pupil and is often composed of different colors that may vary depending on the species, sex, and season. For example, male warmouth, Lepomis gullosus, have much brighter red irises in the breeding season compared to females. And often you'll find the term eye and orbit being interchangeable, especially for the purposes of my identification guides. The gill plate, also known as the gill cover or operculum, is posterior on the head and covers the gill arches. This is the third body part I want you to memorize. The gill plate is composed of 4 bones that collectively are called the operculum. The most anterior bone is the preopercle that rests above the inner opercle, and posterior to the inner opercle is the subopercle, which rests under the largest bone of the operculum, the opercle. You don't need to memorize all of those details, but you do need to understand at least where the gill plate is, and that it is also often called the gill cover and operculum. Beneath the gill plate are the gill rakers, bony extensions that exist on the gill arches and are primarily used for retaining food organisms when feeding. These rakers are the fourth body part that I want you to get down. The rakers are white and vary in size, shape, and distribution along the arches. Different species may have very different sizes on the gill arches. These rakers may be very beneficial for analyzing during identifications, especially if hybridization is involved. I've created a separate video showing how to look at these gill rakers. That's linked below, and also on the website co.org/sunfishes. I've taken photos of the rakers and all of the species and posted them there for your reference. The nape is a dorsal region of a fish's back, typically starting behind the eye at the margin of the skull and extending to the anterior edge of the first dorsal fin. This term is somewhat loosely defined and may vary depending on your resources. The lateral line or trunk lateral line here is usually easily visible on each lateral side of a sunfish. This is a part of the fish's sensory systems for detecting vibrations formed by displaced water. The lateral line along the body begins behind the head, usually just above the dorso-posterior portion of the gill plate, and extends laterally all the way onto the caudal peduncle. Each lepomid typically has a complete lateral line with the exception of the bantam sunfish, Lepomis symmetricus. A complete lateral line just means that the pores running along the lateral line are visible, or at least present, along its entirety. And finally, we have the opercular flap, or more commonly called the ear flap, which is also the last body part I want you to get down. This one's very important. Each species of lepomid has an opercular flap, or a fleshy extension atop the opercle. This flap is one of the best features to analyze for identifications of lepomids. Very colorful edgings may exist along this flap, as well as colors existing on top of the flap. Some opercular flaps grow to be very large, such as on the long-ear sunfish or the red-breast sunfish. So knowing this feature will really help with identification. All right, you're doing great. Let's go over the 9 things I want you to pull away from this video. We have our 4 basic anatomical directionalities: dorsal, ventral, posterior, and anterior. Anterior describes the direction towards the head of the fish, while posterior describes the direction towards the tail of the fish. Dorsal describes the direction towards the back of the fish, or the spinal region, while ventral describes the direction towards the belly of the fish. The first of 5 body parts that we should make sure we get down are the pectoral fins. On sunfishes, the pectoral fins are located just behind the head, where there is one on each lateral side. Then we should know the maxillary or maxilla. The maxillary's posterior edge is important to note for comparing the size of the mouth and jaw against the position of the eye. The gill plate, operculum or gill cover, yes, we're using them all synonymously, is the hard, bony cover on the back of the head that covers the gills. The gill rakers are right underneath the operculum or gill cover or gill plate. These are white, tooth-like bony extensions of the gill arches. Again, I've created a separate video of which I will link below, showing how you can easily observe these on your specimens. And finally, there's the opercular flap, or more commonly called the ear flap, that fleshy, often colorful extension on the back of the gill plate. Each species has a mostly unique presentation of this ear flap, and it is a beneficial feature for identification purposes. We give props to all the people who have supported and continue to support Koa Nature with one-time donations, and of course our monthly contributors, the Koa Nature Patreon patrons, koa.org/support if you want to learn more. I will be dropping more lepomid videos in the near future, as well as more videos with ID guides, tips, and tactics, and fishing adventures. Alright, fish responsibly and good luck. Cheers.